Hey, David Brewster here with another Three for All, and this is three Frank Zappa licks from 1988. And of course, Frank Zappa is the late, great, rock and jazz musician, composer, frontman, legend of, avant-garde music. And definitely, when I first heard Frank Zappa's music when I was younger, my ears just didn't understand what was going on. There was too much information. I was used to kind of cut and dry, Van Halen, AC/DC, Zeppelin, that kind of stuff. And then when I heard Zappa, I was like, what in the world is this? I thought, is this two albums playing at the same time? Is this, what is going on? It was so, just a shock to my system, just very bizarre, very strange, very random, and very unique. And, definitely he's one of those musicians, if you're not really hip to, avant-garde approaches in music and dissonance and atonal and 12-tone roll and all these different things, then his music really will shock your ears when you hear it. So here's an image I made just to kind of give some of the viewers out there that maybe aren't that familiar with Frank Zappa's music. This is a visual example of pop music, in my opinion. And it's kind of silly, but I'm trying to make a point here. So this is what pop music looks like if you could see pop music. And this is what Frank Zappa's music would look like if you could visually see his music. It's very different and very abstract. Frank Zappa notoriously, worked with all of these outstanding musicians. He was almost like a musician farmer, or something like that, where he would hand pick, drummers and horn players, guitarists, keyboardists, xylophone players, whatever he wanted. He would hand pick people and bring them into his band. And then he would push that musician or groups of musicians, and really challenge them and throw crazy phrasing and time signature, key signature changes, all this craziness their way. And they either kind of rose to the occasion and they could play it, or they completely folded and failed, and were crushed, by Frank Zappa's ideas. For a tiny sample of some of Frank's kind of just randomness, one thing that I noticed early on when I saw some footage of him playing is he notoriously liked to pick on the fretboard. He would actually have his picking hand, striking the strings and picking and playing lead and rhythm and stuff. And he's literally, strumming and picking right here, which is very unusual. And it produced this kind of clucky, plucky kind of sound, kind of bassier than normally picking back here because you're further along, on the neck. And just very interesting. But here's a clip of him playing, and he's doing this crazy spastic tremolo picking, and it's kind of showcasing, picking on the fretboard right there, which that's just one tiny, element or fragment of Frank Zappa's universe. But I always found it really interesting that he seemed to really like picking right here. The ideas in this lesson actually came from a rehearsal soundcheck in Philadelphia in 1988, and this would have been Frank's kind of final, rock band tour in the late 80s. And definitely a lot of fans consider that one of the best, definitely one of the best tours Frank Zappa did in the 80s, if not one of the best Frank Zappa tours. And definitely back in the 70s, he had a ton of great tours. But it's interesting because this was rehearsal footage you can actually find on YouTube. It's all cut up into different, sections or, chapters or whatever. But you can actually find their sound check rehearsal, on YouTube, almost complete. And it's random, but during this rehearsal and sound check, they actually play Sleep Napkins, which is a variation of Sleep Dirt. And I did feature Sleep Dirt in the chord play I made for Frank Zappa. All right, one more little factoid before we jump in, but the album Sleep Dirt was released by Warner Brothers without Frank Zappa's approval or knowledge. They just kind of did it. And this is, like in the late 70s when Frank and Warner Brothers basically, there was a lawsuit. And Warner Brothers released three, Frank Zappa albums without his permission. And Sleep Dirt was one of those albums. And, even though there's controversy around that album, I really do like that album, and I'm glad Warner Brothers did that, even though I know it upset Frank and it caused this huge legal battle. But that's basically why you see photographs of Frank Zappa wearing a t-shirt that says Warner Brothers sucks, because he was fighting for his music and his rights with his record label. The first lick is actually the opening melodic phrase from Sleep Napkins, and it's something like this. And there you can see we're basically in B minor. And Sleep Dirt and or Sleep Napkins, it basically opens with this B minor add 9. Where we've got the B, the open D, and we're playing that C sharp right there on the 6th fret on the G string. And that's the 9th in B minor. So with that opening phrase, he's actually targeting the 9th right there, that C sharp. And then he keeps targeting that C sharp. And it's just a really interesting melodic, phrase or opening phrase. And we're going to basically dive a little bit deeper as far as, adding that 9th or that C sharp to the B minor pentatonic scale, which is kind of what Frank's doing in this song. But here's the clip of him playing this first phrase. Right, now here's the second melodic phrase from Sleep Napkins, and it actually starts differently, but it ends the same way as the first phrase. But here we're doing that same pull-off, and then you're going to shift into this E, and then you're targeting that C sharp again before you repeat, the second half of the first lick. Something like that. And I like that where you hear him kind of, move to this higher pitch, and then he's right back to that 9th or that C sharp. Really interesting. And right after this clip, we're going to break down, and kind of get into the trenches as far as, what's happening right there and how you can kind of tap into that in your music too. Right, as far as, adding the 9th to the minor pentatonic scale, which is basically what Frank's doing here. And Frank was notorious for this, where he would, he loved pentatonics and blues and kind of standard, rock licks. But he would dress them up and kind of, mix the notes around in a very erratic and kind of, unusual way. But one approach you can take here, so anytime you're playing over a chord like that, there's B minor add 9. So there's a B minor chord, but that add 9 is kind of giving you a heads up that the 9th, which is that C sharp right there, that's going to be very strong. It's going to be almost stronger than the root note, because there's something different in that chord. It's no longer B minor, it's B minor add 9. So suddenly that 9th is giving you, another option or a strong tone you can kind of hit. So think of B minor pentatonic right here. And all I'm going to do is just add C sharp through the scale. And we can find 3 C sharps right there. The 9th fret on the low E, 6th fret on the G, 9th fret on the high E. And those are the notes that I'm going to add to that B minor pentatonic box. And that would just sing, over an add 9 chord like that. You can find some really cool ways of, kind of targeting that note or sliding into it, bending into it. There's a ton of stuff. So it's important to note here what's happening behind those phrases, because the chord progression in Sleep Napkins is happening. And you've got the, the B minor add 9. And then it moves to a G sharp diminished right here. So So aside from the fact that we're targeting the ninth, over the add 9 chord, the first half of the phrase, that is all played over B minor add 9, and then the rest of it is actually played over that G sharp diminished, which is really unusual. And it's like the best I could kind of reproduce, with one guitar. The next lick is actually the next phrase in this performance or this rehearsal footage. And he's still targeting the ninth, that C sharp. And the chord progression changed, behind this part, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it looks like this. And there you can see we're still targeting that C sharp. And he kind of finishes with that E slide, and then, kind of slides into the E and then hammers on. Something like that. And I like how the horns are kind of, it's like a sax kind of doubling that part, which is really cool. But then the chord progression behind that changed, because now in the chord progression we've got this. Behind that part we just looked at there. So that's a D over F sharp right there. And then basically G minor. So it's interesting to hear that line. Behind those new chords in the progression. Here's a bonus lick from this footage, and this is this kind of altered idea that happens over the next, segment or part of the song. And the chord in the background is really bizarro. Something like that. So that's an F minor major 13 flat 5, which is very strange. And in the song, it's kind of performed that way, an octave lower, and then it shifts up an octave higher, and then you kind of repeat, the cycle of chords in the progression. But that's the chord we're playing over, for this lick, and he's doing, and it's very unusual, and he's definitely shifting on that last note, with a little shift slide in there. Really interesting phrase, because everything we were just playing, was with this modified, minor pentatonic scale. And then you suddenly hear that, which is very strange. But here's the clip from 1988 with Frank playing that. That's going to wrap this look at 3 Frank Zappa Licks from 1988, and trust me, I didn't even scratch the surface. I just looked at one little moment of time in his lengthy and very productive career, and there's a million things you could, kind of zoom in on and focus and learn and uncover and kind of tap into in Frank Zappa's musical realm or universe. There's tons of stuff. And then when you start looking at some of the musicians he's played with, and you can go down those rabbit holes, and it's like, wow, okay, I can study Frank, and then I can start studying Dweezil, and Steve Vai, Adrian Belew, and the list goes on. I mean, there's a ton of players, either with Frank or post Zappa, when they kind of broke off and did their own, solo careers or solo albums. So there's a ton of music and musicians surrounding Frank Zappa, and you should definitely check it out. Don't be afraid or intimidated or whatever, just dive in and, find some albums that you like, maybe try to locate a period of his career. Maybe you like the early stuff with Mothers of Invention, back in the 60s. Maybe you like his 70s run, his 80s run, or maybe some of the orchestral stuff he did, later in his life and his career. But there's no question, Frank Zappa is one of the most prolific and important musicians ever, in my opinion. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content material. Thank you.